It has been a long and exhausting year, and with global anxiety at an all-time high and news headlines coming out that are so crazy it's like they're trying to compete for a spot on We Didn't Start the Fire, there's never been a better time to put all of that aside and enjoy a nice, simple, cozy game. Cozy games have a special place in my heart. If we haven't met, I'm Mooney, and I'm a lawyer, and being a lawyer can be stressful, it can be brutal, and there are times when I close my eyes and picture myself someplace far away, a little cottage in the woods perhaps, with a small stone bridge over a babbling brook right where the forest meets the meadow. Actually, moving to said little cottage in the middle of nowhere, however, isn't really that feasible. Adults have responsibilities, and a lawyer doubly so. As such, to handle the stress, instead of just dissociating more, I play cozy games. There's nothing quite like a cozy game to help ground the spirit and remind oneself of the simple pleasures that exist in life. You can do mundane things that you wish you had the time and motivation for, like raise chickens or grow tulips. And you can do the fantasy stuff that's only possible in dreams and storybooks, like talk to cute little forest spirits, befriend a powerful wizard, or afford to own your own home. I've played so many cozy games to escape reality that I have a tier list. And you're watching the second cozy games tier list, updated with some 2024 games, new games I've played, and with ratings moved around after a bit of review. Alright Moody, what is this, a recipe for ethnic food? Are you going to tell us your grandma's life story next to? Where's the tier list? Okay, well, fair enough. Without almost any further ado then, please enjoy the official Moon Channel 2024 Cozy Game Tier List. This year's Cozy Game Tier List is brought to you by our dear friends at Displate. Let's face it, Christmas shopping can be tough work. Some people get everything they want, others don't ever buy anything at all. What are you supposed to get for either of these kinds of people? Well, you get something that appeals to their personality, to their identity, something that says, I understand you. And to that end, nothing captures personality and identity quite like art. But then a problem arises. You could get your loved one a painting or a poster, but what happens if your loved one is, say, an admirer of American regional social realism and also a giant weeb? Well, that's where Displate comes in. A Displate is a sleek metal poster that can be put on your wall without putting a hole in it, and it can be easily swapped and arranged at your leisure. A metal poster means vibrant colors without glare or sheen, and it means that your beautiful art resists wear and tear in ways that paper and canvas cannot. Speaking of American regional social realism, take a look at this Norman Rockwell painting that Displate was so kind to send to me. My personal favorite Rockwell from Displate's American Vintage collection. There's a ton of different collections, unique and licensed designs with over 2 million different artworks available in the complete catalog. I might not be a giant weeb, but I do have a passion on the side for marine biology. And as such, if I'm feeling a little less Phoenix Wright and a little more royalty-free smug dolphin, I can swap out Lady Liberty for this adorable whale poster. Take a close look, too. It's a Textra poster, which is printed with tactile textures and 3D contours for a really distinctive and beautiful look and feel. 'Tis the gifting season, and 'tis fast approaching. Get a gift that lasts, and that can be appreciated by any sort of person. And get a discount while you're at it, but only for a limited time. Click on the link in the description or go to displate.com/moonchannel and use code moonchannel to get up to 36% off your order. Displate ships fast, too. Your new metal posters will arrive in just 4 to 5 business days. So what are you waiting for? Go get yourself some plates at displate.com/moonchannel, code moonchannel. A special thanks to Displate for sponsoring this video. Cozy game is a bit of a nebulous term. I find Subnautica relaxing, and you probably don't. You might find Factorial relaxing. I think you ought to lay off the ADHD medication. In any case, because cozy is such a subjective term, we have to set some ground rules. Moonchannel defines cozy not in the Oxford Dictionary sense as in feelings of comfort, warmth, and relaxation, but more in the Danish sense of hygge, a comfortable conviviality that engenders a feeling of contentment or well-being. Which is to say, a cozy game must create not just comfort and relaxation, but intentionally foster a feeling of belonging and wholesomeness. All other considerations supplement this cozy core. Like last year's tier list, we're also going to grade our games relative to some criteria. 4 of these might be familiar to you, and those are characters, gameplay, setting, and scope. The 5th and new criterion for this year is vibe, because setting and scope and characters are all well and good, but vibe is what unifies the experience. And though vibe is a highly subjective term, this is also a highly subjective list. That said, as you will see, a game can get a low score on setting or vibe or characters and still score high in the tier list. The overall game, to me, is more important than the sum of its constituent parts. The criteria aren't rules, they're guidelines. Oh, and one last rule or guideline, I'm staying away from early access games in this tier list, and as such you won't see Fields of Mystria on this list. This rule might change for the future, but I found that playing early access cozy games leaves one with a not so cozy feeling of running into that incomplete content wall. So for now, completed games only. Mostly, at least. With the rules now out of the way, let us get to rating games, starting with number 1, Fae Farm. Pearly and I both played Fae Farm on the Switch this year. I actually got a hard copy of it last year from the Nintendo store in Rockefeller Center here in beautiful, absolutely freezing New York City. I was quite excited about Fae Farm, and the Nintendo store presented it as a major release for the Switch at the time. There were decorations you could take photos with and advertisements galore. As such, I went into the game with some high expectations and came out of it a little underwhelmed. The setting is pretty good, the vibes, immaculate. A mix of Harvest Moon and Rune Factory with a gentle sprinkle of fantasy life and a delightful fairy aesthetic that I feel is a little underutilized in the cozy game space. As I began to play, I thereby expected Rune Factory with the fantasy dial turned a little towards Disney and the whimsy dial turned up to maximum. What I got was the veneer of a cozy game built around what is fundamentally a lackluster dungeon exploration game. You see, Fae Farm has some beautiful settings. There's that frog place, there's the ice area and the fairy area, but everything in the game proper is gated around your exploration of the game's mines. And sure, it's like that in a lot of other cozy games, right? You start with copper and you use copper to get iron, and iron tools are more efficient than copper tools. But in Stardew, you can blast right through the mines. They have some challenge, but it's never that tedious, and a very competent player can blast through a fifth of the first mine in a single in-game day if they so choose to. In Friends of Mineral Town, the progenitor of cozy game mining to my knowledge, and the best of the Harvest Moon / Story of Seasons games, the mine is important, but the mine is gated by your progress in-game, as opposed to having your progress in-game gated by the mine, and that makes all the difference in the experience. You can't make too much progress in the mine without good food, and you can't get good food without extra ingredients or unlockable kitchen utensils. If you want to min-max and grind the mine, you can do that too. That's up to you. In Fae Farm, though, the mine is so crucial to your progress and such a grind that about halfway through the game I started to dread it. There's quite a bit of grinding in Fae Farm, just generally. And for what? The customization is cute, sure, but at least when I was playing, the customization also felt relatively limited. I liked some of the characters, but the character development of the NPCs was also rather shallow. The story is a little rote and lackluster, nothing too special there, or for that matter, relatable either. There's what I like to call a Disneyland effect. You know how in Disneyland everyone and everything has to be happy? If a kid is crying, staff are trained to find a way to make that kid smile because in the happiest place on earth, sadness is wrongness. If you're a cozy game dev, let me ask you, does anybody in your game ever frown? Is anyone ever sad? And if they are sad, is it believable? Oh, but we're targeting a younger audience, you might say. Well, even kids feel sad, and a little sadness in a cozy game isn't unwarranted. Experiencing genuine emotions in a safe place, even the hard ones, can be cozy, which is why so many people think of Undertale or Deltarune as cozy games, despite how heavy those games can be. All of this to say that the Disneyland effect makes Fae Farm's characters and their plights feel superficial. In Stardew, it's fun to give gifts to non-romanceable characters because you get to participate in their character growth and experience their stories. In Fae Farm, NPC interaction feels a little transactional, and the outcome of that transaction isn't arguably even worth it, as there's little reward or story that emerges from character interaction. I ended up romancing Pyria, the introverted goth bookworm elf. She can be a bit prickly at first, but she opens up later. Very much my type on paper, but looking back at Fae Farm, I can't recall any aspect of Pyria's story, and I played it earlier this year. The in-game wedding, the spouse moving in, it all felt a little perfunctory, and as the NPCs are always smiling all the time, I didn't get the sense that any of them cared altogether that much about anything going on, and that included my in-game spouse. As such, I'm placing Fae Farm in the C tier, which I think will be a little controversial. I don't regret playing it at all, and if you like the vibes and setting, you'll enjoy the game. But if you play cozy games for the characters, the story, or the gameplay, Fae Farm might not be what you're looking for. Hey, speaking of Disneyland effect, next up on the tier list is Disney's Dreamlight Valley. It's an attempt at an Animal Crossing-like with some heavy Kingdom Hearts vibes on top. I covered this in last year's video, but there have been some changes since then. This game is still a Gameloft game at its core, and it feels like a mobile game. That said, Dreamlight is also, I'd say, probably the cozy game with the most available customization options, and that customization list is only growing. Interactions with NPCs are shallow. The story is mobile game shallow, which is to say merely a veneer that hides the game's pay-to-play gating mechanics. And of course, this game has some very powerful Disneyland effect, where all expressions of feeling and emotion are kept Disneyland safe. The game feels targeted to 30-something moms in the American Midwest who are looking for a safe way to both express themselves and feel like they're making some progress in life after their second kid started going to school. The game's entire soundtrack could have been performed by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and it wouldn't have seemed out of place. And look, there's nothing wrong with any of that. Dreamlight Valley is a better way to deal with a midlife crisis than LuLaRoe, and it's a better game than Farmville. If you're looking for a game that's got a lot of customization and that your kids can sometimes watch you play without asking funny questions, and you could do worse than Dreamlight Valley. Strong on setting, okay on characters and scope, low on vibes for me, but your mileage may vary. Given improvements in customization, I'm bumping Dreamlight up to the C tier this year. In last year's tier list, I placed the entire Harvest Moon franchise in the C tier, but I don't think that's fair. For franchise-wide placements, at least moving forward, I'll be using the best game in a franchise with some exceptions allowed for series reboots or major development changes. I played the original SNES Harvest Moon and enjoyed it very much. It really was quite revolutionary for its time, but it doesn't play that well if you go back to it now. The standout game for me then, in the Harvest Moon franchise, is Friends and More Friends of Mineral Town on the Game Boy Advanced. Is it a little repetitive? Yes. But all the Harvest Moon games are repetitive. The innovation that Stardew made was taking the Harvest Moon core and pushing the gameplay boundary enough that one doesn't have to develop a daily identical routine if one doesn't want to. Stardew took the Harvest Moon bones and added meat, but Stardew also took the most of said bones, said structure from, I'd argue, Friends and More Friends of Mineral Town, from the mines to the female playable character and much more. There's actually a 3D remake of Friends of Mineral Town available on the Switch. I haven't tried it, but if it's like the original, it'll be a less dynamic and more grounded Stardew, which isn't a bad thing necessarily if you ask me. Harvest Moon gets moved up to the B tier. The series is still good, but with so much innovation having been done in the cozy game space, it also feels a little dated. In Friends of Mineral Town, I romanced Potpourri, and she's almost always my go-to romance in any Harvest Moon game. Potion Seller, I am going into battle and I want your strongest potions. One of the earliest ideas I had for Moon Channel was a video on an emerging genre that I like to call the Recettear-like. Games with a cozy vibe in which you own and operate a store. In those script notes, I wrote that it is only a matter of time before someone thinks to combine Recettear with cozy game visual novel style romance options. Little did I know that at the time, Potionomics was already on the way. Released in 2022, Potionomics has romance, it has social elements, it has potion making and potion selling. It is quintessentially cozy, but it is not an easy game. There's a lot of stuff you have to micromanage and keep your eyes on. You can easily fall behind in the game by not understanding the mechanics of its crafting and not prioritizing the right upgrades. If you are the sort of cozy gamer that finds Stardew's calendar anxiety-inducing, then Potionomics might not be the game for you. Pearly found the game pretty easy, but she's a smart cookie. Her brother, the lawyer, the former top 200 StarCraft 2 player, the once upon a time number 7 Zarya by score per minute, he, which is to say I, found it pretty hard. Major kudos to the devs though. They recently introduced a cozy mode which significantly reduces the potion micro, the difficulty of bosses, and the time slot anxiety. There's also a free love mode which allows you to experience multiple romances in one run, further reducing storyline anxiety. And for you Pearlies out there, there's capitalism mode, the game's hard mode. If you didn't realize these modes existed, they were only just released in October of 2024. I'm almost tempted to go back and play through the game again on easy mode myself. There's no shame in that, folks. Don't let me or anyone else tell you otherwise. I will say, the characters in this game are wonderful. They're deeply lovable, cute, and relatable, and the art is oh so beautiful. But you know what the best part of the game is? The best part of Potionomics is the music. Before law school, I was a music major, and I'm a classically trained baritone. I've used the Potionomics soundtrack in a few different videos already, and it's a soundtrack that I like to return to from time to time just to indulge. I really liked Saffron, Luna, and Zidriel as far as romance options go. I always pick the Saffron character for romances, so I was between Luna and Zidriel for a distinctive romance. Ultimately, I went with Zid, and it was a well-written romance. If I played Potionomics again, I definitely see what the Saffron and Luna romances were like. I loved both of those characters too. Pearly's romance choice for this game was Corsac. Cool guy, Corsac. Stoic, but with a kind heart underneath that tough exterior. I messed up last year and said her choice was Quinn. I got a lot of her romance choices wrong last year, it turns out. I'm sorry, love. Oh, also you can't romance the cat pirates, sadly. Which is fair. If you could, who would pick anyone else? Given Potionomics' recent updates, I'm moving it from last year's B tier all the way to the S tier. I thought long and hard about that decision, but the game has great gameplay, an incredible setting, lovable characters, an impeccable vibe, and the best dang music in any cozy game that isn't Animal Crossing. A tier just doesn't seem sufficient, and Potionomics is a brilliant realization of the rest tier formula. Moving on though, we have Sunhaven. Sunhaven returns from last year's list. Imagine Stardew, but with a scope meter cranked up 2 notches. And I mean literally 2 notches. There are not 1, but 3 different farms for you to manage in Sunhaven, each with different plans, a different setting, a different town, and with different characters. If that's giving you anxiety, then you might find Sunhaven a bit overwhelming. In Age of Empires 2, I can micro a ball of crossbowmen and manage my woodline at the same time. I can balance res and raid using different control groups, no sweat. But Sunhaven gave me some decision paralysis. I can't imagine how overwhelming it feels for more anxious gamers than I who are purposefully looking for a cozy experience to manage all those farms. There's just so much to engage with. The farms, the seasonal events, the road-blocking sleeping bear things that need a ton of resources to clear, but that keep returning every season. No matter how much I loved the game, I just couldn't push myself to continue. I will say I found the characters surprisingly compelling, despite my initial reservations about them. I rolled my eyes a little bit, for example, upon meeting Kitty, who I figured was just some weeb-bait catgirl character. But as I made friends with the villagers, including Kitty, I learned about Kitty's insecurities, which in turn made me feel like a real jerk for stereotyping her. The source of her insecurities, you see, are the very stereotypes I assigned to her upon meeting her. Kitty dresses in a certain way and is a catgirl, and I judged her for it. The game's writing caught me in the act. As we became friends, she gave me a keepsake, her cat toy. "Oh, little mousy," it reads, "maybe there's someone out there who will make me as happy as you do. Nya." It's cute, but it also tugs at the heartstrings a little bit. It made me feel sad and reflective. Even the nya at the end, which I would typically read disdainfully, made me reflect on my cynicism and the sort of person I want to be. You don't judge people on their appearances in real life, Mooney, right? What made you do that in Sunhaven? What biases do you have to examine within yourself here? What can you learn from this? That's some good writing, if you ask me. The setting is beautiful, the characters are great, the customization is fun. The grind is a little heavy, though, and the scope, good lord, the scope is preposterous. But if you can self-impose limitations on the scope and play the game piece by piece, I think you can have a top-tier time in Sunhaven. Sunhaven, like last year, remains in the A tier. Next up is Coral Island. Now, Coral Island is a game that I really want to love, but this game out-Disneyland affects Disney's Dreamlight Valley, and that's a real accomplishment. Most everyone has big, warm, tropical smiles everywhere. There are a few smoldering, emotionally unavailable characters that grow to like you, but whom I struggle to like in return. There's a storyline focused around environmental themes that can be a bit ham-fisted. Your ostensible enemy in this game, the Joja if you will, is Pufferfish Drilling Corporation, an oil drilling company led by, and I kid you not, branch manager Karen. The game ostensibly takes place in Southeast Asia, but it's a weird tech-bro-y digital nomad version of Southeast Asia. Quick disclaimer, I've had friends who have reached out asking if I'm referring to them when I talk about digital nomads or tech bros. The answer is no, I'm not. Unless you're an American tech worker or influencer watching this video in Chiang Mai right now, I'm not talking about you. And if you are, then you'd love Coral Island. Because Coral Island feels like the Chiang Mai interpretation of Southeast Asia. It's an influencer's idea of tropical paradise. There's so much about Southeast Asian culture to celebrate and explore, but very few games have succeeded in blending that culture into gameplay without it being overbearing or underbaked. Stairway Games is based in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and there are definitely some influences in-game that you can see. The Lake Temple, for example, gives me Tamansari vibes, but in spite of this, there's just so much digital nomad energy that it poisons the whole well. The big smiling Disney-style character portraits don't help either. That said, I get the sense that the devs have heard these concerns loud and clear, and the game is improving in this direction. There was a new Merfolk Kingdom update, and though I've yet to try it, it seems like an interpretation of a mermaid kingdom with a distinctive Southeast Asian aesthetic. Mermaid Kingdom is an extremely underutilized setting in cozy games, and I like that the merfolk are all named after mountains, with King Krakatoa and Queen Nanda Devi, two Indonesian volcanoes, leading the kingdom. It's a fun idea, and the new portraits and characters seem more grounded as well. I'll have to try it this year and give you an update in next year's tier list. But I will say that I am cautiously optimistic about Coral Island. I'll end this segment with an anecdote. When I first saw a trailer for Coral Island way back when, my mind immediately went to the novel The Coral Island, A Tale of the Pacific Ocean by R.M. Ballantyne. Now in this book, there are 3 boys who get shipwrecked on a Polynesian island and go on a survival adventure. It's a so-called Robinsonade, based on the 1719 novel Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. In short, a character or group of characters gets shipwrecked on an island somewhere and has to find some way to survive. I thought the game being named Coral Island was a purposeful reference to the novel, and maybe it is given the oil rig plot and all that, not to mention the tropical island utopia elements of the game. But there might be a deeper layer here, a cry for help, if you will. For you see, the novel Coral Island was written in 1857, in the United Kingdom, at the height of the British Empire. And the major themes of the book are, and I'm going to quote here from Wikipedia so that you know it's not just my own words, and I quote, "The influence of Christianity, the importance of social hierarchies, and the inherent superiority of civilized Europeans over the South Sea Islanders." So maybe the game's title is a reference to the book with regards to oil companies and the environment. Maybe it's a reference to the book in regards to the utopian nature of Coral Island proper. But in a roundabout sort of way, I can't help but wonder if the title of the game is a reference to how the devs must necessarily cater to Western audiences to sell their game. If Coral Island has to look like digital nomad Bali, perhaps even against the developer's personal preferences, due to market forces. Or maybe this is all just a coincidence and I'm overthinking things. There's a video idea for the future somewhere in this big mess. For now though, we stay cozy. Coral Island remains in the B tier, but I think it's on the way to A tier. The gameplay is solid, the bugs are getting fixed, new plot elements are being added, and the game is better for it. Up next, we have Cozy Grove. You know how in Animal Crossing, occasionally a villager will ask you to bring a little package of something to a different villager or to find something they lost on the map? Imagine if you built an entire game around that mechanic and you more or less have Cozy Grove. It's a beautifully cozy game with a great atmosphere and setting. There's an underutilized Magic Boy/Girl Scouts theme that I absolutely adore, and which is very reminiscent of Luke Pearson's Hilda. But the scavenger hunt fetch quest gameplay, paired with a real-time clock mechanic, means that you're forced to devote months of your actual life to Cozy Grove. And that is not something that I can do. I think back to my time with Cozy Grove fondly, but I dread picking it up to play again. As such, Cozy Grove remains in the B tier. Our next game is Growing Up. Growing Up is a stat-building game, a Princess Maker-like, if you will, that snuck its way onto the Cozy Game tier list last year because it's all about figuring out who you are and where you belong. The gameplay might be a combination of visual novel and Tetris Attack, but you can make friends and build a career and fall in love and even have kids. It's an interesting take on the stat-builder genre. Having played more of these games though now, I find that Growing Up is a little short and lacks replayability. As such, I'm moving Growing Up to the C tier, but with a strong recommend, as it's a lot of fun and a great way to spend a lazy weekend. Speaking of Princess Maker likes, here's a literal interpretation of that. Volcano Princess is another stat-building cozy game where you play as a single dad tasked with raising a daughter to adulthood in a fantasy world. You don't have much, and as a single father, life is always a struggle. The game resonated with me in many ways. As an older brother who dotes on his 2 younger sisters terribly, I actually teared up at points, and the game helped me process some difficult emotions about loved ones growing up and becoming their own people without you. The game does get a little grindy and repetitive, but it also never escapes the constraints of its scope to feel overwhelming. And your kid is super cute and lovable. I used the Chinese voice acting the whole time, and that only added to my enjoyment. 但是呢，你可能会有不同的感觉. Your mileage may vary. With all of this in mind, I'm placing Volcano Princess in the B tier. I had a great time with this one, and you might get a week or two out of it if this is your sort of game. If you're curious in the end, the game rated me a Moe Dad, which I'm told is fairly accurate. In Volcano Princess, you raise a kid in a fantasy world. In my life as a teenage robot, you are a kid in space. I thought the concept of I was a teenage exocolonist, or I wait, Iwate, was pretty cool. You and a ship full of spacey kids have to build your lives and personalities in a totally unfamiliar and alien world. Despite the vastness of this alien world, though, the game's scope feels really restricted. It's played straight by some of the characters, but most of your gameplay is confined to a tiny walkable space that almost feels like it would have been better suited to a menu. Which is a shame because the environmental art is really quite lovely. The characters are going to be a big hit for some and a miss for others. They're spacey and quirky, but almost too quirky, if that makes sense. Every exocolonist has a literal genetic quirk that they're programmed with. Anemone has scales that make her extra durable. Tammy has elf ears to hear extra well. But every exocolonist also seems to have a personality quirk that makes every romanceable character except maybe Cal feel like a caricature at times. Tang, short for Tangent, one of the game's most interesting characters, is an ace arrow trans and I think also autistic scientist, who is halfway between being a human supremacist and a Warhammer 40k tech priest. Rex, short for Bezorexia, is an airheaded, extremely flirtatious dog person who dresses like every day is Burning Man. Google his full name, Bezorexia, and you get his personality. I didn't find almost any of the characters that relatable, not even straight-laced Cal. But not every game has to have characters that are relatable to a straight male, and I appreciate that this game gave me a window into life experiences and identities that are very different from my own. As long as someone finds these characters relatable, it's a plus in my book. The game encourages multiple playthroughs, and at time of writing I just finished my first, albeit with some early save scumming, which I've since stopped doing. There's a reason for that, and if you know, you know. I attempted to woo Tammy, short for, and I kid you not, aspartame. Like her namesake, she's very sweet, genuinely kind and generous to everyone, but also timid and easily frightened. Unfortunately, about 90% of the way towards romancing her, my best friend Cal, that handsome son of a gun, swooped in and stole my date. There was a whole conversation between Cal and I where we decided to let Tammy choose who she wanted to be with, and she chose Cal. I don't blame her, and fair enough, I thought. It stings, but we're still bros, Tammy and I are still besties too, and I get to be a godparent someday, which is cool with me. You gotta let these things go sometimes, rule your emotions and don't let them rule you. Word of advice from a career older brother. You deserve someone who picks you. Don't get stuck on someone who doesn't pick you. Anyhow, almost immediately after that happened, Tangent gave me a secret admirer ring, which I was shocked by. We started dating and it was cute and weird, but weird is interesting, and with all the plot twists and turns, with all the relationship beats, even the rough ones, I have to say, Exocolonist has at the very least been quite thought-provoking, if also sometimes just a little bit tedious due to the constrained scope and grinding. As such, Exocolonist goes into the B tier, sometimes cozy, sometimes tedious, but always intriguing. Oh, and a final addendum, I finished my first run of Exocolonist just now, and Tangent also dumped me for her own mental health reasons, it seems. Ugh, poor girl. I have to admire Exocolonist for its realistic relationships, at least. My player character didn't win first place in anybody's heart, not even that of her own father. She never got married, she never had the kids she wanted, and she was nobody's hero and nobody's villain. She saved the planet, but nobody cares, not even herself. Maybe she tried too hard to be pleasing to everyone, getting high stats, giving lots of gifts to friends, and in doing so, forgot to be herself. She also ended up, completely unintentionally, I kid you not, as a lawyer. Ouch, Exocolonist, hitting a little close to home there. But what is this, therapy? Let's move on to our next game. Verdant Skies. Verdant Skies returns for this year's list despite how niche and unknown it is. I met and talked to the head dev at, I want to say, PAX one year, and they passed me a code after a short discussion. I actually really like Verdant Skies, and I buy into the vision for the game. If it had simply had more resources put behind it, more Kickstarter income maybe, it could have been a major contender in the cozy game space. The characters are quirky but fun, relationships are meaningful, the game's farming and DNA splicing mechanics are pretty novel, and the scope is good too. That said, Although each individual character is interesting, they rarely have any unifying background, and the group never really came together into a town, if that makes sense, in the way that Stardew's Pelican Town does. The game also lacks some polish. Both mechanics and visuals aren't as cohesive as they could be. Still, I believe in this game, and I hope that we'll see more of Howling Moon software in the future. Verdant Skies goes into the B tier again this year. And that brings us to Kynseed. Kynseed is a game that I had very high hopes for. The art is so cute and the trailers looked great. There's a vaguely smushed together English and Celtic aesthetic which is quite charming. But if you've played it, you'll know exactly what my complaint is. This game is incredibly confusing. I have no idea what the goal is. There's a time skip mechanic that I don't totally understand. The plot makes no sense whatsoever. The pacing is inconsistent and at times glacial. The more I try to play it, the less I understand what it wants from me. I hope that after last year's review, someone might try to explain to me what I'm missing with Kynseed. But nobody has, and I suspect that nobody will. That said, it's a feature-complete game and clearly a work of love and passion. If the game had clearer direction and a narrower scope, I suspect there'd be something worth really digging into. As such, Kynseed remains a C tier this year, though I will admit I was tempted to move it down a tier. Roots of Pacha is next, and I have a lot of complicated feelings about this game. It's an ambitious idea, a cozy game farm life sim that takes place in prehistoric times. I have a bit of a personal gripe when it comes to the prehistoric setting in video games, and that gripe is that the prehistoric setting, the Paleolithic setting, for one reason or another, is almost always inspired by Gene M. Owell's 1980 novel, The Clan of the Cave Bear. The book follows a young Cro-Magnon girl who is orphaned from her clan after an earthquake, but is found and adopted by a different Neanderthal clan. It's historical fiction, ostensibly set in Europe during the Upper Paleolithic era, and every caveman core Paleolithic game takes inspiration from this book, from Roots of Pacha as stated to Chrono Trigger. The young Cro-Magnon girl in Clan of the Cave Bear is named Ayla, and she stands out from the Neanderthals around her because of her long, blonde hair.
Daryl Hannah is Ayla in the Clan of the Cave Bear.
It's an extremely dorky, very niche gripe, I know. But this gripe of mine also plays a role in the larger setting. Just like how in Coral Island, where we have the veneer of Southeast Asian culture painted over a core that is fundamentally Western, in the vein of the Coral Island book, so too does Pacha paint an Andean cultural veneer over what is essentially the setting of a European novel about Paleolithic Europe. Pacha is an Incan conceptualization of the universe. In the Quechua language, Pacha is literally translated as place, but in its wider context, Pacha is something more akin to space-time. And the problem with setting your game in quote-unquote space-time is that it becomes devoid of context and the setting gets muddied. In-game, you can cook arroz con leche, congee, baba ganoush, empanadas, injera, quinoa cake, pumpkin pie, and schmabal. Pumpkin pie was invented in the 1600s. Its invention required sugar from South and Southeast Asia, pumpkins from the Americas, and wheat from Europe. In Pacha, pumpkins and wheat can both be grown and harvested despite the Upper Paleolithic setting. Which is fine, it's fantasy after all, we're not here for a historically accurate caveman simulator, Mooney. If we wanted a 2-hour lecture on Neo-Confucianism, we'd watch a different video. Okay, fair enough, I get it. I do, I'm not trying to give the devs any grief. If anything, I mean to sympathize with them. I've seen this firsthand and experienced it myself. It's hard to share a cultural experience with audiences who aren't of your culture, and a cozy game lives or dies pursuant to the whims of its core audience, which is largely Western, and whom are looking for a feeling of coziness and belonging that resonates with them. An Andean historical setting, or a more relatable Southeast Asian setting for that matter, might be alienating. I'd love to see a cozy game dev team take on the difficult task of exploring a cultural setting in a way that can be both cozy and culturally unalienating someday. A game that can be so cozy inside of the context of its cultural roots that it inspires even outsiders to seek that cultural coziness for themselves, instead of bending the culture around a core that is familiar to them.
Hi, I'm Timo, co-founder of Soraden along with my brother.
Hi, I'm Karen, the narrative designer. We're based in San Diego with the rest of the team in Argentina.
But I digress. Pacha has a good scope, a fun setting, and some good characters. None of it especially stands out though, and the progression system of the game incentivizes at times a bit of grind. Pearly and I did a lot of fishing, which we both got pretty tired of by the time we stopped playing. The mount system though is cute, and the different environments are pretty if at times a bit sparse. I'd love to take more time to revisit this game next year and offer more thoughts specifically about the progression. For now, I'm going to place Roots of Pacha in the B tier. This tier list video is getting longer than I anticipated, so let's get through the next 2 games quickly. Coming up is Spiritfarer. I discussed Spiritfarer in last year's video, and not much has changed since then. The game is still very cute and cozy, but it is wrapped around the anxiety-inducing topic of death. While I think the game handles that heaviness well, I still personally had trouble with it, and I've yet to finish Spiritfarer for that reason. We're keeping Spiritfarer then in the A tier. Moving on then, we have my time at Portia. Last year I ranked Portia and Sandrock together, but after having played both a bit more this year, I think a separate ranking is warranted. The Mai Tai series is very heavily crafting oriented, with a lot of grind. Portia in particular is a grind fest. There were points in the game where I was having Factorio flashbacks, and that just shouldn't happen in a cozy game if you ask me. The characters are pretty good, with a few standouts having some interesting plot twists, but overall the story and setting can feel shallow. The scope of Portia is pretty large too, and it doesn't always feel warranted. The game's grindiness and the map's size feel like padding, which can make Portia a bit tedious to play, particularly as you get later into the game. Portia then goes into the C tier. The sequel to Portia though, My Time at Sandrock, well, that's a little different. I played quite a bit more Sandrock this year, which inspired me to split up Portia and Sandrock on the tier list. There are a couple of large improvements in Sandrock over Portia. For one, it's less grindy. There's a lot of quality of life improvements that makes the game less tedious overall in the resource gathering, in the mining, the sorting, and more. That said, it's still grindier than Stardew by a factor of at least 2, and the scope of the game, the size of the map, the fact that you have to grind materials and build your fast travel points and more, make the game once again quite tedious to play. I ended up romancing Nia, who only becomes available to romance very late in the game. By then I was almost totally burnt out. The gameplay just sucks the life out of you after a while. I will note I was actually pretty impressed with the story. It starts really generic with some obvious twist villains, but there's a sort of invasion that happens partway through the story that completely caught me off guard. The game's a little buggy, a little janky, if you will, and so when the big story reveal happened, I expected it to be a mess, given the scope of the story event. But it turned out really well, and indeed it seems sometimes like the big story beats got a lot of the game's attention and resources, and the lesser activities like seasonal festivals weren't given the polish they should have. I was most impressed with the character of Grace, who I probably would have romanced if it didn't seem like Nia was the game's canonical choice. Her story is pretty interesting. I won't spoil it more than that. With some more playtime, I'm correcting Sandrock's tier from last year's C tier to a B tier. It's a fun game and a strong contender in the genre. I will say, with how much the team at Panthea is improving from game to game, I expect My Time at Evershine to be the game that really breaks through for them. We're coming into the home stretch here with Rune Factory 4. As with the Harvest Moon games, I'm grouping the Rune Factory games together, and of the RF games, the best in the series is, in my opinion, Rune Factory 4. Pearly thinks that the characters in RF3 are better, and that's fair. But RF4 has so much gameplay, so much to do, that I think it outpaces not only 3, but a lot of other RPGs of its time. There are all these monsters to tame, recipes to cook, ingredients to gather, skills to find, gear to grind. It's all there, even if sometimes it can be a bit disorganized. The characters are fun, but at times they can be just a bit shallow and tropey. My biggest qualm with Rune Factory 4 is that the story can be a bit disjointed, and the romance is virtually impossible. Forte, the town defender, is my favorite romance option of almost any game, but I've never married Forte in RF4 despite multiple playthroughs because marriage in RF4 requires a specific series of events that have a very low chance to trigger. Pearly tells me that Rune Factory 5 is a bit of a step backwards for the franchise as well, with the game not having made the translation into 3D space very well. We'll see what the future holds for Rune Factory. I do hope that RF5 is only the beginning, and not the end, for Rune Factory. Rune Factory 4, like last year, gets an A. Before we wrap up, Pearly has 3 reviews of her own for games she played that I did not. Pearly says, for Moonstone Island, the graphics are cute and I do enjoy a good deck builder. I think there are a lot of good elements here and it's a fun game, but nothing really wows me. Nevertheless, a solid B tier. Didn't capture my attention enough to finish it, but still enjoyable. Pearly also played Graveyard Keeper, which she says doesn't have the aesthetics of your traditional cozy game or your typical heartwarming storyline, but she really enjoyed the gameplay loop. It was satisfying, and I felt motivated to progress, she says. I played this one through to the end, and I recommend it. A tier. And last but not least, Pearly played Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. She says Sakuna is really good. It requires some skill, which could be frustrating at times if you're looking to be cozy. But it's easy to get attached to the characters, and more importantly, your rice. She says it definitely made her appreciate rice more, which is an A tier. And this brings us to the final 2 games of the year, as is tradition. We'll start this year with Stardew Valley. I think it's fair to say that most of the modern cozy games either in development or that have been released in recent years are Stardew-likes. You'll note that I didn't say Harvest Moon-like. Stardew was clearly inspired by Harvest Moon, that's indisputable, but none of these modern devs are looking at Harvest Moon. They're looking at Stardew and trying to emulate its success. And in so doing, Stardew's constituent parts have been carefully dissected and analyzed. Some devs see the art and think, aha, that's the Stardew magic. Other devs see Pelican Town and the villagers' scheduled paths and the gift-giving and the storyline interruptions a la Harvest Moon and think, oh, this is the magic. Yet others think the exploration and discovery of the unknown or the customization or the romance or the fishing is what makes Stardew great. But no, what makes Stardew Valley the best game of its kind is how authentic it feels, how genuine the experience is. Pelican Town feels like a real small town. People in Pelican Town have real small town problems. There's no, oh, the magic tree is sick or the nuclear Blorbotech machine is broken. The material conditions of the characters around you are reasonable. Here's an example. One of the romanceable characters, Penny, lives in a trailer with an alcoholic, abusive mom. And yet both Penny and her mom are interesting, multifaceted characters that you can befriend and whose life situations you can directly improve through your friendship. There's reality in the situation, but there's power fantasy in that you can intervene in that reality and make things better for your presence. When the 30-something Disney prince running a museum in Koh Tao tells you about the plight of his museum's funding, it's hard to feel empathy for him. Listen, pal, I don't know, ask your dad for a grant, sell the private jet, work 2 more hours a week for your tech company or something. Look, I get that you're both sad and handsome, but I sell caterpillars for a living, alright? Give me a break. But in Stardew, when Shane's working at a dead-end job just to drink his sorrows away every night, and yet in his heart only wants to be a better father figure for his goddaughter Jazz, and maybe raise some chickens, you feel something for him. You see yourself maybe, or someone you know, in Shane. You can picture yourself quitting your job and putting down your addictive coping mechanism and raising chickens too. That's all I'd do all day, you think to yourself. I'd just be a catcher in the rye, and all. And that you can experience that story, that reality through Shane, is something that no other cozy game dares to approach because every cozy dev believes that the purpose of the cozy game is to escape from reality, to flee the harshness of our real world. But Concerned Ape offers hygge, offers belonging, not an escape from reality, but a picture of what reality could be, nasty bits and all. Pelican Town is never perfect, right? Sure, you can scare big corporate Joja away, but Pierre has his own problems. You can help Shane or Penny or Leia improve their material conditions, but there are still larger problems looming over the horizon. The game hints at these problems, but doesn't ever show you them in full. Yet Stardew feels so meaningful to play because it gives you something that many games and really the real world doesn't give you. It gives you hope, optimism, evidence that people like you and I are fundamentally good and worthy without quantifying that worth in gold and despite our flaws. An idea that if we are kind and invest in each other's well-beings over each other's wallets, the world can actually improve and get better for all of us. That's what makes Stardew special, and that's what so many of these other cozy games fail to understand. Cozy isn't a place to escape outside to, it's a place to retreat inside to. It is not a new world that you seek. It is a better world. Stardew is at the top of S tier, and though it may be contrarian to put it there nowadays, I think it deserves to be there. And for your information, I always date Penny in Stardew. I always tell myself that I won't, but then I do anyway. I like her kind heart and generous spirit. It resonates with me. Anyway, this brings us to the last game on the tier list. And that game is Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing has a special place in my heart. I played it with Maya and Pearly back when we were younger. We fished for bitterlings in the winter to sell for 1,300 bells each. I will always remember that number. We planted fruit trees and gave gifts to Pearly's favorite villager, Biscuit. Our father loved to fish too, so he would often join us in our hunt for bitterlings, passing the controller back and forth and ogling the occasional new or rare fish. I'm grateful for these memories as they overshadow other, more difficult ones. You see, Maya, Pearly, and I, we're native New Yorkers, and Animal Crossing released in 2002. The prior year was difficult, to say the least. I still remember the smell in the air, chalky and sweet. I remember the panic, the fear, and the anxiety, and yet, in spite of it all, somehow, fishing is what I remember clearest about that time, and for that I am deeply grateful. Animal Crossing has a funny way of appearing exactly when you need it. City Folk was released in 2008 just as the financial crisis was getting underway. The financial crisis hit New York extremely hard and there was a lot of anxiety in our family, but City Folk was a calming presence throughout. When the COVID-19 pandemic rolled around, once again as New Yorkers, we were hit extremely hard. And when things were at their most dire, in rolls Animal Crossing yet again. My experience with the quarantine wasn't refrigerator trucks and desperation, it was talking to Audie and making a pretty meditation area with waterfalls and grinding for tarantulas. Animal Crossing is often copied, but never successfully fully emulated. On paper, the experience should be quite shallow. The villagers all have a limited number of canned dialogue options and personality types. There's only a handful of things that change in the day-to-day game world. There's furniture and a house to decorate, but to what end? There are quite a few gamers for whom Animal Crossing never clicks, and this is all they see. A shallow game about collecting money and upgrading your house for no actual end goal. Gathering all this stuff for nobody to see. But that's just it. The best thing about Animal Crossing and what sets it apart from Cozy Grove, despite both having a real-time mechanic, is the fact that there is no goal. Animal Crossing almost forces you not to set goals. The bridge over there gets built whenever you feel like it. Tom Nook's loan is interest-free and he's totally cool with you never paying it back if you choose not to. Imagine a world where those who have more are willing to uplift those who have less without the expectation of profit or reciprocity. Imagine a world where the anxiety of income is lifted from your shoulders, and the shoulders of all your neighbors, such that their biggest problem is needing someone to help deliver a t-shirt to a common friend. Imagine a world where the decorations in your house, the furniture on your patio, and the flowers in your garden were not put there to impress your neighbors, or for your parents, or for anyone's expectations, but were instead for you. I mentioned earlier in the video that marine biology is a secondary interest of mine. Well, my Animal Crossing bedroom is almost always mermaid-themed. I can see some of you judging it already through your monitors. Well, in Animal Crossing I do what I want. I've built my room not according to anyone's expectations and have opted instead to sate my sense of whimsy. And the levity of the game allows for that decision to occur without gravity. Dreamlight Valley is always pressuring you to complete more objectives and make more space and farm new things and get new clothes and do this and do that. It has to, it's basically a mobile game, right? And Cozy Grove kind of pushes you, but to a much lesser extent, to do the same thing. There's always a demand to do something for fear that the game will become boring. Animal Crossing is confident enough in itself to allow itself to be boring sometimes, and that makes it wonderful. It's no surprise, then, that Animal Crossing gets an S tier once again. I'll be shocked if it ever gets below that. The Cozy Game tier list started as a way for me to get away from some of the channel's heavier content to work on something simple and fun for the holiday season. December is the most valuable time of year for advertisers, so YouTube channels all over are scrambling to produce content. But me, well, I'm trying to take it slower this year. We're missing quite a few games that I'd still like to play, including Garden Paws, Wildflowers, Harvestella, Summer and Mara, and a bunch of early access games like Field of Mystria. We'll get around to those eventually, or not. That's the essence of Cozy, right? We'll get to those games when it feels right to do so. Most gamers can be pretty cynical about Cozy games. Your favorite streamer or YouTuber might have scoffed once or twice at the proliferation of Cozy games at award shows or Nintendo Directs or whatnot. But the growth in the Cozy genre is a reflection of the times. And just as I said last year, Cozy games are exactly what the world needs. Cozy games are a mirror held up to the world, showing it not as it is, but what it could be. A world where good-natured people stand in solidarity against predatory ghouls. A world where you can be the fullest realization of yourself and not shaped into something you aren't by the societal pressures around you. A world ruled not by the dollar, or by bells, or by gold, but by the kindness of the heart. What a cozy, cozy world that would be. I've been your host, Mooney. Moon Channel donates 10% of its income to charity in pursuit of that cozy, cozy world. As such, thank you for your patience with this video sponsor, Displate, and for subscribing to Moon Channel on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. Your support means the world to me. Oh, and if you're a cozy game dev and you'd like your game to have a slot on next year's tier list, send me an email and a code or drop a comment and I'll take a look. I love the cozy game space and I want to support it however I can. May you have a Feliz Navidad, a merry holiday season, and a happy new year. I'll see you next year. And as always, as ever, thank you for tuning in to Moon Channel.